tariff war against China is misplaced, is a fantasy, is not going to be a reality. My simple point is very elegant and simple. Don't mess around with the biggest manufacturing power in the world. It is not China that is changing the status quo across the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. It is people like Nancy Pelosi. Can you really believe that China is a force to be really bullied around? The tariff war against China is the wrong war for the United States and for President Trump to fight. And the expectation that China will crumble under maximum pressure as a result of the tariff war against China is misplaced, is a fantasy, is not going to be a reality. Now, another point is that probably President Trump and his colleagues in the White House failed to really appreciate the scale of the economic might in China. Let me be very brief. In terms of the purchasing power parity, the size of the Chinese economy is already about 130% that of the United States. In terms of power generation, China produces more than 2.5 times as much electricity than the United States does. In terms of the power or electricity for industrial use, China has more than 6 times more power for industrial use than the United States. Now, in terms of, let's say, high-speed railway and EV cars, for example, there are hundreds of these major items that China is not only producing more than the United States. China's production, in many cases, is more than 50% of the global production. My simple point is very elegant and simple. Don't mess around with the biggest manufacturing power in the world. At any given moment in history, China's manufacturing output today is more than the combined amount of the United States, EU, Japan, and quite a few others combined together. China's production of iron and steel is more than the next 10 largest iron and steel makers in the world combined together. So you want to mess up with China for your own detriment or for your own peril? You do not want to do that. So the first point I want to make is that President Trump and his administration should serve themselves better to have a more keener, a more accurate, a more pragmatic and realistic perception of what China is today. That's number one. Number two is that the tariffs charged by the United States government are not paid by China. China is not paying a single penny of that. Japan pays? No. India pays? No. EU pays? No. The tariffs charged by the US government will be paid in its entirety by the American people. The tariffs will be reflected in the prices the American consumers will need to pay when they buy goods imported from other countries. Let me use Walmart as an example. When President Trump threatens to charge hefty tariffs, Walmart talked to the exporters in China to see whether they would absolve the tariffs. No one wants to absolve the tariffs. So Walmart eventually paid the US government the tariffs charged on the goods that they imported from China into the US market. And eventually Walmart actually allocated the total cost of the tariffs paid to the US government, reflecting them into the purchase price. And President Trump jumped out of the seat screaming foul and tried to block Walmart to charge the tariffs to the American consumers. But Walmart is not a charity. It's not a foundation. It is a business operation. It needs to cover its profits and losses. So eventually, who paid the tariffs? Not China, not the Chinese exporters, not the Chinese intermediaries, for example. It is paid by companies like Walmart, which will not completely absorb the cost. It will allocate it to the American people. So if anyone in Washington wants to debate this point with me, I will be very happy to travel to Washington to really share with you the realities. I can have tons of printouts as to who really paid the tariffs. It's not by China. And the Chinese government has not a single penny to pay for the tariffs charged by the United States. The exporters are not paying. The exporters probably will be prohibited by law in China from paying the tariffs charged by the Americans. So eventually, let President Trump and his government and the officials around him have the decency and the dignity of telling the good-natured, good-hearted American people that eventually the American people will pay the tariffs. And the tariffs collected by the federal government in the United States will not make America strong, will not make American people richer. They will make the American people poorer because you eat up into their purchasing power by adding more costs to the final price they will pay when they buy goods imported from other countries. I think President Trump or people around him, especially some of the anti-China persons, they suffer from two nightmares. The first nightmare is that they worry that China will catch up with the United States or eventually surpass that of the United States. But that nightmare is misplaced because, as I mentioned, depending on how you measure it, China is already larger than the United States or already much larger than the United States in many, many categories. We talked about production of automobiles, iron and steel production, cement production, concrete production, chemical fiber production, computers, electronics of all kinds, etc. China's production is way ahead of the United States. And no country, the United States alone or in concert with other countries, can weaken China's economic and industrial output capabilities. That's number one. The second nightmare suffered by these people in Washington is even worse. They worry that once China surpasses that of the United States, China will impose its values, political system, ideology onto the United States, marginalizing the United States, squeezing the United States out from the center of the global stage. Nothing can be farther away from truth than this nightmare, because China wants to deal with all the countries in the world, big or small, including the United States, as an equal. We want to respect you, big or small, especially a big country like the United States. We want to learn from you. We want to work with you. We want to get along with you for mutual benefit. So either when China was smaller and weaker before, or stronger and bigger today, or even stronger and bigger in the future, China will never try to block America's development or impose our system onto the United States. What we follow is what I call your God for you, my God for me. I always will recognize your right to worship your God, but don't impose your God on me. And I will never impose my God on you. You follow your own growth path, and I follow my growth path. And we tried our best to get along with each other. That is the reason why I always say inevitability of peace between China and the United States. War is not and should not be an option between China and the United States. The Chinese people and the American people should not view each other as enemies. We should minimally get along with each other. And please believe me in the inevitability of peace. The Americans say two things are inevitable. One is death is inevitable, probably with the exception of Elon Musk. Nobody knows. Then you need to pay tax. Otherwise, Uncle Sam will chase after you to the corners of the earth. Now I inserted the third inevitability. That is, peace is inevitable between China and the United States. And all of us should work very diligently, very hard to make sure that whatever differences there are between China and the United States will be worked out in peace, in diplomacy, in negotiations, rather than, for example, threatening war against each other. War breaking out between China and the United States will be Armageddon for mankind. Don't even think about war between China and the United States. We are the two greatest countries in the world. Our destinies are to be partners with each other, despite of all the Cold War mentality in Washington. The inevitability of peace will prevail between China and the United States, and the Chinese people and the American people will get along with each other in peace, in cooperation, in partnership for mutual benefit and for the benefit of mankind as a whole. When we talk about Taiwan, we mentioned that the status of Taiwan is carved in history. It's carved as one of the pillars of the international world order established back in 1945. No one, no single human being, not any country can change the fact that Taiwan is part of China. And if anyone in Washington wants to really play around with that idea, they may actually cause the disruption of diplomatic relations between the United States and the People's Republic of China. Meaning, we go back to square one before the normalization of diplomatic relations between China and the United States, officiated on January the 1st, 1979. Do you think that will be in the interest of the American people if China and the United States were forced to break up with each other diplomatically? What will happen to the vast amount of American business interests in China? What about all the productions that the Americans get at a very low cost, with very high quality, with very speedy delivery to their homes, like the toys for your families, for your kids, like the books you read, like the Bibles you read, like the national flags, the Star and the Stripes in the United States, to whom you salute with loyalty, for example. And there is a tendency, it seems, in Washington that they want to continuously hollow out the one China policy. They may believe that Taiwan should be a proxy, which the United States can use to achieve its own geopolitical goals, for example, of wrestling China down to the ground. And they may even stir up trouble or even confrontation or even a total war between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. But the reality is that if war breaks out across the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, that will be the resurrection of the unfinished Civil War back in 1949. Can you believe it? The Civil War in 1949 was never concluded towards a legal ending of the Civil War. Therefore, if conflicts really break out between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, it will be a resurrected civil war. Now, do you really think the United States wants to pick one side of the civil war against the other? And you want to support the 23 million people in Taiwan? And the separatists are only a very, very small fraction of that versus the 1.4 billion people in China's mainland? No, that's a futile attempt. That's an attempt destined to failure before it is actually started. The United States will really serve the fundamental interests of the American people better to urge peace and maintaining stability, for example, rather than changing the stability and the current status. It is not China that is changing the status quo across the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. It is people like Nancy Pelosi who made that illicit visit to Taiwan, urging for independence and separatism of Taiwan, which caused China to tighten the noose, for example, against the separatists in Taiwan. Can you really believe that China is a force to be really bullied around? If you want to bully China, if you want to violate China's red line, then you will get the consequences and you will be penalized for that. You do not want to become Nancy Pelosi II, because after making that illicit visit to Taiwan to urge for the separatism of Taiwan, she is declared as a persona non grata. She will never be able to set foot in China. The Chinese door will be forever closed to Nancy Pelosi and any of the politicians in the United States who dare to push for the separatism of Taiwan from China. This is the megatrend. I hope President Trump will be very wise and very smart, not stirring up more trouble across the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. I hope President Trump will look at China as it is. There is only one China, and Taiwan is part of China, and he does not want to play foul with the one China policy, and he does not want to really shed the blood of the American soldiers and officers. For what? For the separatism of Taiwan from China, which is futile to start with.